This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright, for today's Critical Thought, we're returning to the concept of helping players learn how to play their games or to grow from the design or the tutorials. And this is going to touch on several different topics we've talked about on previous Critical Thoughts, including the topic of strategy guide game design, where a game is built in such a way that you cannot learn it using the in-game mechanics and tutorials itself. Now, good game design is about providing the player with all the means they need to beat the game. Now, this is a little bit different from the concept of player-centric design, or design a game in a way that everyone can beat it. And that way, it's about trying to make your game as broad as possible in terms of its mechanics, but not every game can be designed that way, and some games are built around a higher than normal difficulty curve, as we've talked about with the Soulsborne series. But with that said, it's still important that the player should be given all the necessary information and all the relevant information regarding how your mechanics and systems work. In a game like XCOM 2, for instance, whenever you take a shot or look at stats, the game spells out pretty clearly how things are supposed to work. When you're about to shoot an alien, you can look at a point-by-point breakdown of what's affecting the chance to hit, whether it's a positive from, higher elevation to a negative from like range, or the enemy has kind of special armor. But the point is that the player can look at this information and understand how things work, and then they can start to grow their knowledge base at the game. Another great example of this is from the concept of organic tutorial design. And this is what I talked about when a game presents new mechanics or systems in an otherwise safe area, or in a place where the player can experiment without fear of death or penalty of taking damage or stuff like that. Games or series from like Nintendo, and even stuff from like Half-Life and Half-Life 2 are good examples of this. Whenever something is new put into the game, it's always presented first in a place where the player can experiment freely. In Half-Life 2, when you first get the gravity gun, you're going to experiment with it in, I guess, Black Mesa East or West, one of those two. And you're free to, mess around with it. You can play basketball. Again, there's no penalty of anything. And then after that, once they assume you know what you're doing, they throw you into Ravenholm, where it's zombies and you're going to have to make use of cabinets, saw blades, and more in order to kill all the crazy zombies and head crabs coming at you. But the point is, the player is given the knowledge first before being tested on it, rather than introducing a brand new mechanic the second you introduce a boss fight or some crazy situation. Now, going back to the topic of strategy guide game design, this is something that we have thankfully moved away from in recent years, but there are still some examples of this. The idea is, like I said, if it's in the game, the player should be able to understand what it means or figure it out using the game as a reference. You can have the most esoteric, crazily hidden quests in the game, but if you can give the player references to it, if there are clues within it, then at least they can solve it on their own. If you literally give the player no information about it, then how are they going to figure it out? And the classic example that I talk about is from Final Fantasy, I want to say 12. Again, I always get the numbers confused there. But if I remember right, from Final Fantasy 12, there is an optional weapon in the game that can only be found if you open specific chests in specific areas in a specific order. And if you mess up just one chest in the chain, you lose out on the item. And literally the only way you will ever know that this thing exists, or even where to get it from, is if you bought the Final Fantasy 12 strategy guide. And that is not good. Now, again, you can argue that it is optional content, that it doesn't serve any purpose to the gameplay or the plot, but if there's content in your game that no one will ever figure out, then what was the point of having it in the first place? Now, another great example, and this is my way of also bringing back some props, is from the classic game Earthbound. And Earthbound actually shipped with the guide itself because Nintendo wasn't sure people would figure things out. And let me see, do I have the page here? Here it is. And one of the things about the game is at one point, I'm going to see if I can get it right. If you look over here, I can't see right now because I have my face covering. There's a section in the game where you have to enter an enemy base. And you also have to fight that lovely guy down there. And the only way to get into the base is you have to wait beneath a waterfall for 3 minutes. And that's not hyperbole. You have to get in that waterfall and don't touch anything at all. If you move out of there, the timer resets. Now again, how is a player supposed to know that that's really in there or not without looking at the guide? And for those of you who are hardcore Earthbound fans, please correct me if I'm wrong. Did they actually mention that in the game somewhere? Again, it has been many years since I sat down to a full play of Earthbound, but that would be something that you would not include that in the game unless you give the player explicit reasons or the explicit explanation of this. There's also other examples from older titles, like I believe Simon's Quest, Castlevania 2, that had hidden walls and hidden floors that you would literally never know they existed unless you already knew about beforehand, because the game gives you no references, no clues about these hidden areas. And these are areas that are required for you to beat the game. Now, later games have introduced ways of showing the player this. It could be the simple act of, let's say along the normal path, a hidden block will stop the player. And the only way to get through is to strike this block and realize that this specific texture or this specific texture block represents a hidden wall or a breakable object. Goes back to another example from the original Mario. And what Nintendo did was position the first Goomba that as it comes at you, if you jump, there's a good chance you'll hit the invisible block above you, cluing you into the fact that there's secrets like that in the game, and that if you're stuck, you should look for it. Now, this would be different if if the designers make no reference to invisible blocks, and then threw in a life or death challenge that required that. If you're testing the player on knowledge that they don't know about, how are they supposed to figure things out? And that is an example of bad design. We can also point to older games that feature classic death traps, walls or floors that have no bearings or no indication that they are faked or that they will lead to a trap. The player walks near, they're killed instantly. The designer's point of view is that this is a way of telling the player, don't stand here. But if the trap is going to be sprung the first time the player walks over because there's no way to avoid otherwise, then it's not really good design, because you're basically killing the player for no real reason. And like I said, fortunately, games have moved away from that kind of design. And I'm going to wrap up today's critical thought here. This is going to be a quicker one, I hope, but you know how these last parts can get. Again, when it comes to good design, information should be made readily available to the player. Now, this is not the same as basically the game playing itself. As in, let's say, instead of telling the player, you need to build a greater military force, the difference would be if the game says, we suggest you build 5 military units of this, this, and this, and move them over here. That would be an example of the game basically, again, playing itself. Good game design is about giving the player the information they need to make an informed decision, or as the famous Sid Meier quote says, to make an interesting choice. And being able to provide that information without overtly guiding the player is a hallmark of great design. And again, when we talk about this, it is a combination of tutorial design, UI design, and in some games even basic level design and structure. Another great example of this would be again from like the Mario Galaxy games or the 3D Mario titles that present challenges in the order of complexity and difficulty, so that a brand new player can get through levels by just simply running and jumping. Advanced players can already start doing triple jumps, somersault jumps, etc. But the general path of the levels will passively teach the player these advanced mechanics, and then they can go back and use them elsewhere, instead of starting the first level off and requiring them to do triple jumps, wall jumps, and all that. For those of you who are watching this, can you think of any other good examples of games that passively teach the player the mechanics without, stopping things for a big tutorial or an intro video or anything like that? Let me know what you think in the comments below. But I'm going to be actually recording tomorrow's Critical Thought right after this, so it's not going to be surprising if I'm wearing the same shirt for tomorrow's Critical Thought. But thanks for watching today's piece. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe if you're new. If you have a suggestion for a future Critical Thought, please let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, check back daily for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GW for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GW for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.